it didn't just affect like the stores and that kind of thing. It wasn't just as simple as, oh, well, they made a mistake and they went out of business. No harm, no foul. It hurt, dozens or even hundreds of people who maybe lost a job or something like that. But this actually affected hundreds of thousands of people because of this bad promotion. So
what have you got for us today?
Today we're gonna go back in time a little bit, and we're gonna talk vacuum cleaners. So the brand Hoover is really not a thing anymore, and this is kind of why, especially in the UK. This is about the division of Hoover that was in the United Kingdom in the late 80s and early 90s. I'm gonna talk about their kind of tragic end.
Anytime advertising is so bad that it puts you out of business,
yeah,
that is definitely something that everyone should take note of and be like, I don't want what that is.
Right. This was an epic bummer, and lots to be learned from their mistakes.
Breaking down advertisements, improving on them, redefining ad space. This is the Advertising Podcast.
So what happened?
All right. So it's the late 80s, early 90s. And basically Hoover had become a household name in the UK for vacuum cleaners. In fact, it was to the point of, like in the US, we call a tissue a Kleenex. We call a bandage for a cut a Band-Aid. It was at that level that people just called vacuuming the house hoovering. And so, yeah, and that kind of, I think for a certain age group,
it still stands around. I've heard British people still say, they'll be like, oh, I got to hoover my house.
Correct. And that's exactly the case.
Dyson now or whatever.
Oh, and it's funny you mentioned Dyson because they're actually a part of this story. But so in the late 80s going into the early 90s, the UK was headed toward a recession. Now, Hoover had been the king of all of this during that time, during vacuum cleaners, crushing it in sales, household name, everything was all good. Well, they're heading into a recession, and they were starting to see competitors hit the market. And the one you mentioned, Dyson, was one of the ones that was hitting the market at that time. I didn't even realize Dyson was that old. But
I don't think I heard about them until 10 years ago.
I know, same here. And even then it was like, oh, cool, there's a thing I can't afford. So
drop $500 on a freaking vacuum cleaner. Although we have I don't know why, but
well, we actually have one too, but it was a gift for the record. Someone gave that to us, and it's only one of their little stick vacuums.
Yeah, the stick one's the one we got too.
Yeah, right on. They're quite useful. Yeah. But anyway, back to Hoover. So there's two things going on. You got the recession hitting, you've got competition coming into the market, and Hoover started to see their market share go down. So basically they were like, okay, we need to come up with a fun, like wild, exciting strategy to encourage people to get back out there and buy more vacuum cleaners. So they partnered with a small travel agency. And this travel agency was also suffering. It was kind of going, okay, people are not booking as many trips. We need to figure something out too. So they proposed this partnership with Hoover to go, okay, anybody that buys a Hoover vacuum over a certain amount is going to get 2 tickets anywhere in Europe, basically. And for that travel agency, if it was going to be within Europe, it was going to be very cheap for them to unload these tickets. And so it was not going to be a big deal to them. Hoover was going to be able to move more product because they had warehouses full of vacuum cleaners that were just sitting there, right? So everybody's going, okay, cool, win-win. And all right, so they decided to launch this campaign, and it starts off great. They're like, okay, anybody that buys over $250, well, it was €100, but it would be about $250 or more. If they spent that, then they get 2 free tickets to anywhere in Europe. Now, because Hoover, they knew, they were like, okay, hopefully the redemptions will be relatively low. Like maybe people won't want to travel. They'll just kind of buy it or maybe not do the paperwork. They made it really hard, which is problem number one. So they made it extremely
difficult. Dates and that type of thing, or like,
oh my gosh, it was way further than that. They had to fill out a form and then mail that in within a certain time period. Then it had to either be approved or denied, and then they had to fill out like another form. And then at any time, Hoover retained the right to like manipulate it. They could be like, oh no, these dates are now blacked out, or no, you have to fly to this airport that's 100 miles away from your home, or whatever it is. So they made it really difficult, but people did it anyway. And actually the promotion, it kind of worked because the price point was right, for the intercontinental flights. And so it wasn't that big of a hit on them at that time. So like the travel agency was doing well, Hoover was doing well. So instead of like riding it or ending it, they were like, you know what? Let's go bigger. We're going to go bigger. And they started offering trips to the US. So now we're talking about flying over the ocean. The ticket prices for those quadrupled, if I remember the number. Like it was way, way higher. And it was a non-starter financially. So okay. Yeah, they were basically in this situation where if people redeem this, we're tanked. And people lost their minds. It was pandemonium. They were selling so many vacuum cleaners. It was ridiculous. And people were clamoring to get this deal. And meanwhile, Hoover knew full well they could not do it. And so for those like cross-continental flights, they didn't redeem any of them. They said no to everyone.
Wow.
Like, yeah, it was ridiculous. If I remember correctly, none got redeemed. And people were losing their minds. They were so mad at them. And there were lawsuits. They lost a bunch of brand recognition. I mean, it was a PR night. Not only was it a PR nightmare, but then it was a sales nightmare as well. Because people stopped buying their product. They stopped trusting them. It was absolutely ridiculous. And then how
did they get out of redeeming? Like, I mean, do they just straight up say like,
yeah, no? They just said no. They kept trying to create hurdles. Like they would do things because they had all this stuff built in. It's like, okay, you have to respond to this within 14 days. Yeah. And so one of their tactics was they would send out correspondence like on Christmas Eve or, during a holiday period to kind of ensure that people wouldn't get it in time, but it would be dated correctly so that they could get out of it. And then it finally had to just be where they were just saying, you know what? No, we're not going to do it. Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. And if we kind of fast forward to the end of it, without going, because y'all can look this up, it was a nightmare. That it was in all the newspapers, all this bad press. You fast forward to the end, they ended up having to sell the company to a competitor for pennies on the dollar, just to like get out from under this debacle. And this all happened within a span of it happened within a span of about 2 years. Because it was around 92 when they launched this promotion. And by like 94, they were done.
So it literally put them out of business.
Yeah. In Europe. Yeah.
And at a time like where, now feedback's instant and like reviews and word of mouth and all of those things. I actually just last night watched the documentary on Netflix for the Fyre Festival.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
So much of this story reminds me of that because it was a classic case of like, under delivering. Now I kind of almost feel bad for the Fyre folks in a way, even though I shouldn't, but
I don't.
But one of the things that put them way under was this picture of literally a piece of cheese between two pieces of like white bread. And that was like your meal, and that like went viral. So Hoover did like a very hard thing of having negative experiences go viral before there's virality, right? I mean, that's like, you got to really mess up if you're getting that much hate, like in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, people were like protesting them openly in the streets. Yeah, at locations that sold their products. Yeah,
So
apparently it was nuts.
here's why that could have been a great campaign, because obviously the response rate is like, number one job of a marketing campaign from a pure marketing standpoint is getting response. So like,
Yep.
some ways this could have been a great great campaign.
And it kind of started off that way until they decided to double down and try to send people across the water. Things were going okay. The article I read even was talking about how their sales projections were even back on track, because they could afford it, when it was an intercontinental flight.
Right.
But then they just tried to do too much.
Yeah, and obviously didn't think through the cost, or is the problem that the price moved on them? Like, in other words, like, did it make sense and then all of a sudden flight to the US got more expensive? Or
no, it didn't change. No, the price was the price. It was just so much more than the intercontinental flight that they couldn't afford it.
Got it.
And read another article, and it was talking about how before they actually made that move to offer flights to the US, they actually went to a risk management firm and presented them the idea. And there was a representative quoted in that article going, yeah, this is a non-starter. You should not do this. Like, if you do this, it's going to lead to like tragedy. And it's like, none of this math makes sense. And then they didn't take the recommendation, did it anyway. And their hope was that their volume was going to increase so much that it would offset the cost. And they were hoping that volume would go up and the redemption rate would go down. And it was almost the opposite.
So, all right. So you've got a market leader that's afraid of a downturn. They obviously had an oversupply issue.
Right.
In other words, they were thinking it was going to be a better year than it was, which is why they had so many vacuum cleaners like sitting around, right?
Part of it was because the economy was turning, but still.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that like Target's in that situation right now, where like or it was quarter before last, I think they said, hey, look, we had a great year in 2020, so we stocked up on all this lawn, all this like lawn furniture and all these other things that nobody was buying this year, and so they had a ton of
They had to liquidate it.
Exactly. Which is, it's like the worst thing ever. We had a garage sale 2 years ago, and my wife was like, hey, we made like, $200. I'm like, no, we didn't. Like, we spent thousands of dollars in acquiring this stuff that we just sold for $200.
Yeah. This is a net loss.
Exactly.
So if we look at all this stuff that's been sitting around as sunk cost, then sure, but
right, exactly. Like, sure, made 200, but not really. Lost thousands is the way I see it. But one of the things that I like about this campaign, so let's say we didn't know the end of the story.
Sure.
Let's say we only knew the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Especially true in the 80s and early 90s. But you've got a mostly female demographic you're going after, which usually is the decision maker in travel as well. That's usually like I own one of the other businesses I own is a travel agency. Right. It's almost exclusively female in terms of the person actually like doing the booking of the trip and stuff, or making the decisions as to where to go and things. So you've got perfect alignment there, because vacuum cleaner decision maker and travel decision maker, like you've got clearly somebody had a good understanding of their audience. It's a recession, so maybe people aren't going to be able to go on vacation as much. So that makes this
trip,
all the more attractive. Because if I can get it, if I can put off buying a vacuum cleaner, but if I can go on vacation and get a vacuum cleaner, hey, that's a win-win.
Makes sense.
But yeah, so really, this only takes a turn like with the dishonesty in ads. Like,
it did take a turn too, though, like in the way that they structured it for you to get a hold of these things, because even from the beginning they made it hard, and that was intentional. Like, they didn't really want to give this stuff away, and it's kind of like, if you don't want to give people something, don't offer it to them. Don't. It's a pretty classic bait and switch almost, especially for the second part.
Which is a horrible business. I mean, especially it's always been bad business, but you could almost get away with it at those times, or at least you felt like you could. Obviously, they didn't get away with it in this instance.
No.
But you could almost get away with it. I feel like those times easier than you can now. Now,
right.
Again, any sort of like unhappy cut, any sort, a friend of mine owns a trampoline park, and he literally said that he can see a dip in sales. Or he saw a noticeable dip in sales for like 6+ months because someone took a picture of a roach at his location, which obviously roaches are gross, and so that does stink. But they happen. Anybody that's ever owned a commercial property, that like
you're gonna have bugs.
Right.
Look, they just want to bounce, man. Come on, just
right, exactly. But someone took a picture, and, went viral and like literally hurt his business for like 6 months. So,
do they serve food there?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do the cakes and all the accoutrement for
for parties. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. But think of it from like a roaches standpoint. I mean, you've got hundreds of kids dropping like cake and crap. Like you're gonna have roaches at that type of place.
Absolutely, it's a feast.
Yeah, exactly. And he sprays weekly and all that stuff. But it from the restaurant world. I mean, you may not want to disclose on here, but I have a feeling you've seen some bugs in your day, my friend.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because it happens.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But anyway, you can't get away with anything in today's world. And so if you have, even if it's just difficult to redeem, that to me is you just shouldn't structure your offers that way. Like,
right.
That's why I think having, I like the idea of having divisions in companies where it's like this person's job is, marketing or leads or whatever. This person's job is, the financial side or those things. But having collaboration among departments, at least sign off from everybody on board, is critical, because I guarantee you, if like their CFO had looked at these numbers, they'd have been like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah, none of this makes sense. They just pushed it through. In fact, here, I'll read you that this is how they structured it. So if a customer buys one, and they have to mail in a receipt and the application within 14 days of purchase, and then Hoover sends them back a registration form, and they have another 14 days to send it back. Then Hoover sends them a travel voucher, and the customer has 30 days to select 3 airports, dates, and destination combinations. Then Hoover has the right to reject those customers' choices, and the customer can select 3 alternatives. And then Hoover also has the right to reject those alternatives and select 3 other combinations of its own choosing. And if the customer doesn't like them, they're out of work, or they're just out of luck.
I almost feel like personally triggered by this, because when I was a young account executive, I mean, literally, like, I had just started. The media company I worked for had this partnership with this company called Sun and Fun Media, which is basically they trade trips for, I mean, I know you're familiar with it, but for benefit of the people on the podcast, they trade trips for advertising. So in other words, they'll go to like a resort and say, hey, look, we've got, if you give us a couple of trips, we'll run your ad, we'll get an ad campaign from a radio company or a TV company or whatever. And all you got to do is honor these trips. But they're notoriously difficult to work with. And I didn't know that, because I literally was like, as green gets. And so I was like, oh, great, this is awesome. This is something, I'll present this to I had one car dealer client that was like my largest client by far. And I was like, I'll give this to him. And, if it was, I forget what the up was, but it was like, if you can get them to increase their spend by like, $2,000 or whatever, they get this trip to Myrtle Beach, right? Which Myrtle Beach is very close to us. It's only like 5 hours from here. So, should be a simple redemption, low cost, drive away. But he had to go through like so many hurdles and stuff. it actually caused him, like, I had several uncomfortable meetings, not about the advertising campaign we were doing, but I had several uncomfortable meetings because he was basically like, who the hell, like, did you like connect me with to book this trip? I didn't lose that client, thankfully, but I mean, like, that's not a situation you want to be in. Like, it's hard enough to keep customers happy, like, with just the thing you do. You definitely don't want to make it hard to do these ancillary things. Because I mean, that would have been like my whole income gone away, like, because of like this random trip.
I actually took one of those Myrtle Beach trips from Sun and Fun.
say they're off there, but there was blackout. You have to be totally flexible as to when you go.
Oh, absolutely. It was not easy. And there was a little bit of a bait and switch with the hotel. Like, we thought we were going to a different hotel, and then we ended up at another one that was not as nice at all. Yeah.
You're going to go to this resort or maybe another one.
I felt like I was in the hotel from The Shining, but not as nice. Like, it was that level of creepy, but not that level of nice. Yeah.
One of the biggest red flags I think of in terms of which this marks it off. If your main concern on an offer is what if somebody sends this to somebody who didn't do it, that is, I think, a big red flag that, like, you shouldn't be offering that promotion, because especially restaurants love coupons, hotels love coupons, those types of things. Anytime I've ever heard a client or an agency partner or whatever, anytime they're like, well, what if somebody, like, texts that free cookie to all their friends? If you're not happy about that, but instead you're upset about that, then probably you're offering the wrong thing.
Yeah, you shouldn't be doing this.
Because it should be like, well, what if they text that free appetizer or whatever to all their friends? You should be like, well, that's great, because then they come in. That's like, that's what you want, right?
Yep.
So when you structure your campaigns, you want to give as much value as you can, but I mean, there's a lot of things that worry with me about that particular campaign, because also too, some of that stuff is costs that they may not have had control over. In other words, it's possible flights could have gone up in price or whatever, and it's possible, so it's like, I don't know your stuff and know you can redeem it. And offers are great, especially when they're in your wheelhouse. Think, who buys my product? What other things do they buy? That's a great way to structure a campaign. Definitely got a response in this case. But you want to make sure that that you're happy about redeeming it. Don't be jerks redeeming your stuff.
I mean, and I was trying to think about, like, okay, they goofed it. How could they have done it better? And it's like, okay, well, create an offer that you could afford. But I mean, I think one of the simplest fixes there could have been just require a higher level of a purchase. If it was a money issue that you couldn't afford the tickets, then just require them. Like, for the tickets to the US, you have to buy a product that's over $500 or something like that, or you can buy $100 one, but it's going to be inside Europe, I don't know.
Anytime something bad happens too. So, like, let's say that they started this campaign and it turned out to be a total, like, shit show, like it was. They wouldn't have gone like completely out of business in the country, or like have zero market share in the country, if they had responded the way you respond to, like, a flooded bathtub. Like, the first thing you do is turn off the spigot, right? So you turn off the spigot, so you stop the campaign down, and then you just clean it up. So they should have just, if they had honored all of those things, it would have been bad for the company, it would have been bad for the shareholders, but we wouldn't be talking about it 20 years later, right? It wouldn't be a case study of, like, how not to do things. Instead, it would be like, man, remember that time that we had, like, a shitty, like, year and a half? We're out of business now. It's like, if I have, anytime you have an upset customer or those types of things, sometimes it's better just to take the loss. So that's another way to fix this campaign. Yes, it was structured wrong from the beginning, because your offer should be something that you're happy about redeeming. But the other thing is like, if you do miss it, if you do biff it, if you do offer a free appetizer and you don't put a cap on, like, how many people can use it at the table or whatever. Just honor it, take the loss, and stop that. Obviously, don't keep running that campaign, but
No,
that's your problem, not the customer's problem. Like if I buy a vacuum cleaner and you say you're going to fly me to California from London or whatever, that's their problem to fulfill, not the customer's problem to fulfill.
no, without a doubt. You mentioned market share. So that at the end of this thing, they had a little over a 50% market share in Europe, and it went to less than 10. And then that's when they sold the company for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah. See, they would have probably had a slight drop in market share, but maybe not even though. I mean, think about like if they had honored it, how many raving fans they would have in the country. Yes, it would have sucked. They would have taken a loss. Probably somebody should have lost their job over that. But that's some great positive wins. You've got companies now like Uber and everything else, or several different case studies of companies that operate at a loss intentionally right now to gain market share and then make themselves profitable. Walmart. Everybody talks about the new tech starts, but that's Walmart's game plan. They'll go into a new, was their game plan right around the same time, actually, the late 80s, early 90s. They go into a market at cost, sell everything at cost until they put everyone around them out of business, and then they raise their costs. Not a great thing for society. Plenty of bad things about that, but purely from a marketing standpoint, that's sure. If I'm CEO of Hoover and I've somehow let this slip through my hands and I've approved this thing and I'm looking at it, I'm taking the loss, I'm flying people to the US, and I'm at least going to tell them to post about it now. And I didn't know.
Oh yeah.
I'm at least hey, at least bring me some customers from it.
Yeah, no kidding. And a lot of them, so there were some lawsuits and stuff like that. And a lot of them people got made whole, but there were still literally hundreds of thousands of people who just had to eat it.
Well, making it difficult where you have to do lawsuits and things to get it redeemed. I mean, that's okay, sure. Maybe they honored it eventually at some point, but you're not, I don't have a favorable feeling towards somebody I've just had to take to court to get them to do their thing. Right. So
yeah,
that's the worst of both worlds. You still have to pay for it. And
they're never going to shop with you again.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Very cool. I feel like we fixed this one. As much as we could. Don't make offers without counting the cost. Make sure you're happy about the redemption of your stuff. And
I think this one is just something that any business can kind of just learn from. Just know that this happened, and just remember that your customers can kind of destroy you if you wrong them, and that's very much what happened in this case.
Something my dad always used to say, actually, because my dad was an entrepreneur, business owner all his life, and he was one of his sort of rules that he would always tell me was when you're a business owner, he said, I wanted to be a business owner because I didn't want a boss. He said, but in reality, he said, when you're a business owner, everyone is your boss, and that's always sort of the mindset I've had too, of your everyone is every customer is. You got to make them pleased, and sometimes that means taking a loss. Sometimes that means honoring a coupon that's technically expired, or whatever, or making some ridiculous request, making it. I mean, within reason. I mean, obviously you can't take a loss overall, but especially if you made a mistake, which this was Hoover's mistake, take the loss.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I deal with it all the time. One of my other little businesses is a bar, and yeah, we have it happen all the time. We don't run a lot of promotions, but if a mistake is made, somebody's getting a free beer, whatever it takes to make them happy, because, I forget what the rule of thumb is now. It's probably changed, but if somebody has a bad experience, they usually go tell 4 or 5 people, but if they have a good experience, they're going to tell no one or maybe one person. Yeah.
I had a dry cleaner one time that I actually did leave a negative review about on Google, which it takes a lot for me to leave a negative.
Oh man, me too.
but I will do it. And but I had a dry cleaner. I remember she was telling me, she goes, yes, the printer messed that up. They were supposed to put an expiration date on it and didn't. And I had driven like, I don't know, not a far way, but I had driven like 4 or 5 miles out of my way to go to this dry cleaner because I had this coupon, right? And because I hate dry cleaning, I would drive across the county to save 75 cents. But that's just I hate that purchase. But she refused to honor it because she was like, yeah, that was supposed to expire last month, but they didn't put it on the thing. And business owner, I'm like, that's it's kind of not my problem.
Yeah, tough luck. Okay.
I feel bad for you that somebody else messed this up for you, but you need to honor this.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not going to sue somebody over $3, but I will leave a negative review. But,
I usually try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Mostly when I'm leaving reviews, it's restaurants, and I'll give a restaurant at least 3 or 4 tries before I do that. Because it's like, anybody can have a bad day. You're off, whatever. There's a restaurant right across I'm not going to say the name of it because it's a big chain, and there's other ones in town that are good, but one just opened up by our house, and we love this concept. And we went there 3 times. All 3 times it was awful, and it was very clear that they were just not staffing well, not paying enough, they just had too few people to make it work. And I finally had to just be like, okay, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and leave a review, because this has got to change. Y'all need some feedback if you're gonna make this better.
Exactly. Cool. Well, that's it. Honor your stuff. Make it easy.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Advertising Podcast, the podcast where we fix broken ads. Please remember that while marketing is an art, advertising is a science, and we at Draft Advertising Technology have the tools and tricks to help you treat it that way. For a bunch of early access to free tools, go to draftadtech.com. That's draftadtech.com. And of course, please like, subscribe, share, and if you leave us a review, just include your name or even the name of your company, and we'll mention you on air.